Welcome back to This, That, and Another, PPL's official podcast about the library and the communities we serve. My name is Jay.
And my name's Sophia. Happy Pride Month, y'all.
And this is our Pride episode recording here at 150 Empire. Did you know that PPL hasn't always been at 150 Empire?
I think I did know that.
It actually opened in 1878 in the second floor of the Butler Exchange building.
So where Kennedy Plaza is right now.
Exactly, yes. All these facts that I've been reading about Providence Public Library as we approach our 150th anniversary, I thought that one was pretty interesting. You can actually find some old photos of the Butler Exchange building at provlibdigital.org. There might actually be some library photos in there as well.
Thank you, Jay, for a little snippet of PPL's history. On this episode of the podcast, we're honoring stories and histories that exist beyond binaries, normative genders, and sexualities.
Later in the podcast, we'll be talking to Kate Wells. She's the curator of Rhode Island Collections, and we'll be talking all about the Rhode Island LGBTQ plus community archive.
We'll also get to hear a couple of the oral histories that are housed in the community archives, those from Jasmine Lee Johnson and Rodney Davis. But first, we want to talk about the survey we sent out to librarians and library staff about their favorite queer literature and books that are in circulation at the library right now.
We're going to talk about a few of them right now, but the full list will be available in the show notes.
Our first recommendation is The Jazzmen Throne for those interested in a sapphic romance. This was recommended by Beka Yang and Lydia George. The Jazzmen Throne by Tasha Suri begins an epic fantasy trilogy set in a world inspired by the history and romances of India, in which a princess and a maidservant in possession of forbidden magic become unlikely allies. Exiled by her despotic brother, Princess Malini spends her days dreaming of vengeance while imprisoned in the Haryana, an ancient cliffside temple that was once the revered source of the magical deathless waters, but is now little more than a decaying ruin. The secrets of the Haryana call to Priya, but in order to keep the truth of her past safely hidden, she works as a servant in the loathed regent's household, biting her tongue and cleaning Malini's chambers. But when Malini witnesses Priya's true nature, their destinies become tangled. One is a ruthless princess seeking to steal a throne, the other a powerful priestess desperate to save her family. Together, they will set an empire ablaze. Jay, have you seen the movie The Handmaiden from 2016?
I'm aware of the movie The Handmaiden from 2016. I have not seen it yet.
Okay, so I don't want to give any spoilers away, but this book reminds me of The Handmaiden, a sapphic love story setting men ablaze. Another recommendation, not a book though.
Good pairing.
A good pairing.
For those of you interested in queer horror and gothic literature, I have a recommendation from Jeremy. Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. Tell Me I'm Worthless follows Alice and Isla, former friends and lovers who 3 years prior escaped an encounter with a malicious, fascist manifestation haunting a house called Albion. The house is evil to its core, a house that attracts violence, feeds the worst in people, and then absorbs all the horrible things that have been done inside it. The novel confronts both supernatural and real-world horrors through the lens of the modern-day trans experience.
And for those interested in autobiographical narratives, there's Gender Failure by Ivan Coyote, which was recommended by Kate Wells. Ivan E. Coyote and Ray Spoon are accomplished award-winning writers, musicians, and performers. They're also both admitted, in quotes, gender failures. In their first collaborative book, Ivan and Ray explore and expose their failed attempts at fitting into the gender binary and how ultimately our expectations and assumptions around traditional gender roles fail us all.
Based on their acclaimed 2012 live show that toured across Canada and the US and in Europe, Gender Failure is a poignant collection of autobiographical essays, lyrics, and images documenting Ivan and Ray's personal journeys from gender failure to gender self-acceptance. Equal parts hilarious and heartbreaking, it's a book that will touch LGBTQ readers and others, revealing with candor and insight that gender comes in more than two sizes.
So all of the books we just mentioned are currently in circulation.
And again, the full list is available in the show notes. Please give a look. Joining us now in the studio, she's the curator of Rhode Island Collections and the project manager of RI LGBTQ plus Community Archives, Kate Wells. Hi, Kate.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Thank you for having me.
So for people who maybe aren't as in tune with it, what is the LGBTQ plus Community Archives?
So the Rhode Island LGBTQ plus Community Archives is a project that's part of our Special Collections Department. And we started it in 2019, myself, as long as with my colleague at the time, Angela DeVeglia. And we realized we had a lot of researchers coming in interested in the queer history of Rhode Island, and we had a few materials, but not as many as we would like. So we looked to see what other libraries and institutions we could refer people to, and we realized that nobody was intentionally collecting or making available materials about the LGBTQ history of the state. And so we realized that that was sort of a niche that Providence Public Library could serve because we do a lot of community archives projects. So we set this project up in 2019, hit a snag with COVID, but got really launched in 2021 with some collections, and then things have been coming in. It is a project that highlights, preserves, collects, and makes accessible the histories of LGBTQ plus people and all of those identities that fall under that umbrella for the people in the state of Rhode Island. And we are doing that backwards through history, trying to find materials that exist that tell those stories and present them, but also collect actively the stories that are happening now.
I didn't realize how recent this archive started, and it's grown so much in this short amount of time. Kate, can you talk a little bit more about how this is different from capital A archives or other things that exist within special collections?
So traditional archives, people think of archives as a sort of home for old stuff. And that can be very true. It doesn't have to be. Archives can contain very modern materials as well. But in particular, a community archive is a slightly different setup than sort of traditionally what we think of as archives. Normally, we might get materials that were created 100 years ago, 50 years ago, much longer, 2,000 years ago. And we get materials in that we don't know much about the context of the person who created them, why they were created, who was using the materials. And in this particular case, one of the things that makes this project different is we really want to engage the people who created the content as much as we possibly can, and also who the materials are about. So our goal with a community archive is to sort of have us facilitate and not be the gatekeeper. And that's sort of one way in which this project is a little bit different. I think also archives tend to traditionally be sort of a little bit more laid back in terms of, we have collecting missions and we're looking for content on specific topics. But in this particular case, we are very proactive in our collecting. So instead of sort of waiting for materials to come to us or appear on the bookseller market, we are really proactively engaging community members to sort of create their own stories and document them. We're building partnerships within the community with organizations that are already doing this work. We know we can't collect everything. Nobody can. There's not enough space to do that. So what we want to do with this particular project is sort of threefold. The first is collect materials that need a home, and we can make that available here at PPL. The second is to uplift and support other projects that are doing similar kinds of collecting work. And so that looks like partnership models or making sure that we're at a minimum referring patrons and researchers to other people or institutions. And then third is to create new work that is either scholarly or creative that utilizes the collections and helps to build a sort of public understanding of queer history in the state. So what we realized is when you Google Rhode Island LGBTQ history, there's very little online. We know that it's not because the stories don't exist. We just know that it's because nobody has maybe published in a sort of comprehensive way. And so sort of the third element is that supporting researchers to create new work of their own that then we can also uplift and share. This project feels, I guess, much more proactive than a traditional archives would.
That's incredible. It just sounds like a form of guerrilla archiving that's happening right now.
I like that idea.
Kate, what's one of your favorite collection items?
So that is hard to say because there's some really fantastic things. So there's two items that I really love. The first was a small collection that was donated by Michael Guy, who purchased these materials from an antiques dealer in West Warwick. The dealer knew the family of the person who put the materials up for sale. And identified them as the, quote, first gay man in Rhode Island, which we found laughable because we know for sure that can't be true. But these are materials that it's a photograph album and a couple of loose photographs that document the life of a unidentified gay man in Rhode Island in about 1929, 1930. And the backstory from this dealer is that this man was married to a woman, had a family, but that he and his wife knew that he also was a gay man and that he took time out to spend vacations with a group of friends, gay male friends. And so this photograph album shows them on their vacations. And so this idea that, what life looked like before people could be out without a lot of potential danger to themselves, but also the idea that those relationships are much more complicated. They're not straightforward. There's a lot of nuance in history. And also it sort of just shows people having fun on vacation. And so at the beach and in a backyard having a party. And so that is one that I love because it is just so informal. The other collection that I think has gotten just a huge response from people is the Kim Deacon collection. So Kim managed the Kings and Queens bar in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. That was a gay bar that ran from the late 70s to the early 2000s, owned by Rita Poe. And Kim's collection is mostly photographs and some videos, and it documents the sort of social space of the bar and the way that that gay bar in particular created a real sense of community for queer people in a way that moved just beyond, drinks and dancing. It certainly documents that as well, but it documents a softball league and movie nights and roller skating nights and picnics at Lincoln Woods and sort of a way in which Kim in particular, but the rest of that Kings and Queens community created a space, a social space for queer people to get together and create their own family, especially at a time when discrimination laws in effect, people couldn't necessarily easily do that in all parts of their life. And that collection has gotten heavy use and has, gotten a lot of people who still are around and can tell us about their stories. So we've done home movie nights with bar patrons and employees over Zoom where they watch home videos together. And then people, we recently put that collection online and it's gotten a huge number of hits. People are spending a lot of time looking at the photographs, which is really fun.
One of my favorite things about this archive is the oral histories that have been collected and the contributors that are still here within Rhode Island and Providence. Can you tell us a little bit about the oral histories? Do you have any stories you want to pull out?
Yeah, so we've been incredibly fortunate to work with Dr. Virginia Thomas, who runs the Queer Stories Project. And she started doing work documenting oral histories for LGBTQ people in the state of Rhode Island also around the time that we were beginning to start this community archive. So we linked up really early on in a collaborative partnership. Essentially, Virginia's been doing the work to coordinate the capture of the interviews, and then we serve as the permanent repository for that interview collection. And we've worked together on a large number of programmatic series as well as workshop and learning opportunities for people to learn how to do oral history and participate in that process. So those oral histories are a really fantastic way to get firsthand knowledge of what life has been like for a wide variety of different people with a wide range of different experiences. One of the things that we know is that there's a generations of elders who have passed away before those oral histories have been able to be documented. And especially for people who lived in a time where their lives were quite at risk because of legal restrictions, because of the sodomy laws and the discrimination laws that were in place, there's sort of very little paper record that exists around the queer experience because having things documented could put you at risk. So getting firsthand accounts is incredibly important to actually capture a full picture of somebody's story. And there's just details that you're never going to find. You could look at the Dameron gay guides from the 1970s and 80s, which might tell you there was a gay bar on Dorrance Street called the Fife and Drum, but there's no pictures of it. There's not any sort of documentation or film footage, at least that we found. If people have it, we'd love it. So you get a firsthand account from somebody who actually visited that bar, and that gives you a sense of how important that space might have been in downtown Providence. So Virginia is very aware and conscious of trying to gather the widest range of experiences possible. even within queer archives, we know that the most accessible stories are of white gay men. And that's just because the sort of larger societal context of whose stories have traditionally been valued as historically important is white men. So even within the larger sort of context of queer history, finding and documenting the stories of people of color, of people who identify in ways that are not just gay or are, socioeconomically disenfranchised or disabled or sort of all these other intersectional identities has been a real priority for Virginia's project. And oral histories are some of the best ways that we can do that. So some of the oral histories that I think are most impactful or that I go back to really frequently for my own sort of interest are the stories of people who otherwise might not show up in a traditional archive way. So one of the things, that makes, I think, Rhode Island unique is this way in which we are both geographically linked to other larger metropolitan areas like Boston or New York. There's also the sort of route that we are for folks leaving New York and coming up to P-Town and stopping here along the way, people coming here for school and deciding to stay, but being from somewhere else. And so those stories kind of show up in the oral histories really well. So one example is Jasmine Lee Johnson's story. So Jazz came to Rhode Island as a RISD student. Their oral interview talks a lot about what was it like where they grew up, what was it like transitioning to Rhode Island, to RISD, and then why did they stay, and how did their experience as a queer woman and a queer Black woman sort of like take place in this particular space.
Here's a short clip of Jasmine's recording.
I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I grew up with me and my mom mostly, and my brother. My mom is one of 11 kids, so I have a lot of cousins, and family is really, really important to me. But one thing I should mention is that my mom was a dancer. So from a very, very young age, she just surrounded me by the arts, by artists, performers, the theater. There were times when even she would be performing or something, and because she was a single mom, I would bring my 101 Dalmatians sleeping bag and be behind stage and go to sleep in the midst of a show. So just from a very young age, she always was a proponent of the arts. So I, at a very young age, started performing and dancing, and just like even sometimes before she would start a class, if there was a piano there, I would just play whatever I heard while she her records, her tapes, I should say, her cassettes, as she warmed up before the students came in. So dance has just been a part of me and continues to be a really important part of my practice. I just remember when I was in college in 2004, when Bush was reelected, a lot of us young people were really upset, and we wanted to find a creative means to sort of channel what we were feeling and not become apathetic, because for many of us, it was our first election voting. And long story short, like what came about as a result of that election was me building friendships and community with other young people who were, I don't know, just like having their political coming of age. And we created a project called the Beat Back Bush workout, which I directed and edited and like basically was the director and editor of. But it was in collaboration with this group of students, some of whom were friends, some of whom met each other for the first time. And everyone there was just, for me, like, oh my God, I have been spending all this time at RISD, and while I felt like I was really learning a lot about craft, I felt like the themes and the content of what I was doing was like I needed more. So I did start taking classes at Brown, and I don't know, I felt like we were all at that age just having a coming of age, a knowledge of self, and self-discovery and political discovery, and finally figuring out language around it. And I was really just impacted by this strong group of women who were, who I really looked up to, even though they were like my peers and they were my own age. And for me, it was the first time I just felt like in a community, like in community with people. And it wasn't like, oh, this is my theater group, or, oh, this is chorus or whatever. And as I got to know, people in this group, I started to read more things and have more conversations just around like identity, around desire, around globalization, around politics, and was personally thinking even like outside of the scope of the United States. And that was like the beginnings, I think, of my my discovery of my own queerness.
So a second interview that I think has some great context for sort of longer history, and especially the history of Rhode Island Pride as an organization, is Rodney Davis. So Rodney talks a lot about his own journey as a Black gay man in the state of Rhode Island and what that looked like as he sort of gained a leadership role as a community advocate and a leader at Rhode Island Pride. His involvement in sort of taking it from a daytime parade to a nighttime parade, and the decision-making that went into that, and the way that sort of shifted how Pride is celebrated here compared to other places. But also he talks quite a bit about sort of the experience of being a leader and a leader of color and what that looks like here in this place where we both have like easy access to one another in some ways, but also it can feel also small.
Let's hear him talk about that right now.
Well, I think understanding that will give people an idea as to why I got involved in organizing, and in particular with my work with Pride. It was really a manifestation of love for people.
Mm.
It was a lot of work. Working as a Pride organizer, producing Pride is one of the most exhausting jobs you could ever do. There is no pay. You get a lot of community grief if you don't do something right. And sometimes people don't see the vision that you might have. It's funny, next year is going to be the 20th anniversary of an event that we created. We started talking about 20 years ago. And that was myself and my co-chair, Alex Gorieron. We decided we wanted to throw a nighttime Pride parade. And people were like, you're going to do what? You're going to redefine what we have known for so many years as Pride. And again, it's how do we rebuild and remake the world? And we offered something very different, very unique. And at first, very resistant. People were very resistant to it. But again, the motivation behind it was love of community, wanting to see our community grow, wanting to see our community do better, wanting to see our community be better represented, as well as to reach out to new people. So that now, Rhode Island Pride is one of the largest events we have in the state that attracts tens of thousands, up to 100,000 people for Pride Week. Though not this year, but next year, hopefully, we'll be able to celebrate 20 years of being able to do that. And that's not even Pride started in 1976 with 75 people because they wanted to stand up and be recognized, even with bags over their heads. Some of them wore bags because the world was not safe for them to do that. And that's how we build a movement. You have to find that core. And the core, for me, was love. And that's how it fueled my desire to make a different world. And as a result, be able to make sure that everyone got to experience that.
So these two are just one of many oral histories, and there's a lot of different stories to be told. One of the things I think we're really interested in with oral histories is this idea that, you don't have to be at the end of your life to be able to tell your story, right? You can be starting it, you can be in the middle of it, you can be at the end of your life. But the idea for this particular community archive project is just to document where things are at now. And so I think, maybe we would have an interview with these same people in another 20 years and hear how their perspectives might have changed. But that's part of the ongoing work.
So, Kate, what can you tell us about this new project, Queerline?
Okay, so we are just launching this month for Pride a new oral history collecting project called the Rhode Island Queerline, which you can call at 401-834-1097. And you'll get a voicemail prompt from me that asks a specific question. The prompt for this first few months is to tell us about the first gay, lesbian, or queer space that you visited in Rhode Island. Where was it? When did you go? Who'd you go with? How did you find out about it? And what was it like when you got there? And the messages that you all leave us will be added to the Rhode Island LGBTQ plus community archive project to be made available to researchers. And it's sort of a way for folks who might be too intimidated to do a full oral history interview to just leave us a 5 or 10 minute voicemail message. It doesn't have to be a big lift. You can stay anonymous if you want, or you can identify yourself. But there's such a lack of information in the paper record that we're sort of trying to find really fun, creative ways and easy ways for other people to contribute their own experiences. So we'll be putting flyers up around the state and various spots, hoping that people will call in and leave us messages. And the idea is that we'll change these prompts out maybe 3 to 4 times a year with new questions, so you can keep calling back and hearing what's new and leaving us some additional content.
I'm so excited for this project. It's going to be so good. Like we were talking before, it reminds me of Queering the Map.
Yes. Yeah. I think that there's a way, we had feedback that sort of asked for low tech ways that people can get involved. So not just, like digital content, but there are folks who feel much more comfortable just calling a phone number than trying to get on an email and coordinate with me in other ways. And then young people, for some reason, love the idea of a really analog technology. And I think there's that sort of throwback to the idea that like there's just something simple about the idea of like leaving a recording on a phone. So we'll see. What we're hoping that it gets good response rate. So if you're listening and you want to call, just a reminder, it's 401-834-1097.
It also just feels so like the idea of this project feels like a landline, like what you were saying, analog, something about you would be calling on your cell phone, obviously. But to me, it feels like you're walking into a payphone, you're putting in your quarter, and you're giving it a call and archiving your story. I don't know why it feels like that.
That's exactly what we want people to feel like. So I'm glad that feels that way.
Before you go, how can somebody check out the Rhode Island LGBTQ plus community archives?
So if you want to come and physically visit us, we're in the Special Collections Department at Providence Public Library. That's on the 3rd floor of the library. You take a right off the elevator and you'll see our reading room. You can email me in advance to make an appointment if there's something specific you want to take a look at. And that's kwells@provlib.org. And we also have some content that is digitized on provlib.org. That includes the oral histories as well as the photographs from the Kim Deacon collection. So there is some content that you can visit if you can't make it here in person, but it's really easy. We love having visitors. And the easiest thing is if you don't think you can make it during a weekday, then email me in advance because I'm not always here on nights and weekends.
Big thank you to Kate Wells for joining us on this month's episode. A reminder, you can call the Queer Line at 401-834-1097.
And a special thank you to all the librarians and library workers who submitted their favorite queer literature. All of the selections that you heard are currently in circulation. If you don't have your library card, you can come down to PPL and Info Services will help you get one.
You can find us on social media, Providence Public Library on Facebook, at Providence Public Library on Instagram. You can leave us a voicemail, actually, on our Spotify homepage for this show. If you do leave us a message, we might play it on the air. And of course, you can check out the website, provlib.org. Thanks for joining us on this episode, and we'll see you on the next edition of
This, That, and Another.